Hey there, Twisters. Nick here. Today, let's talk about the Stanley Cup playoff picture here. So, when I made a video a couple of weeks ago on the matchups that I wanted to see in the playoffs this year, the picture looked a lot different than it does right now. So, some things have certainly changed. And with just a couple of weeks remaining in the regular season, yeah, things could shift around a little bit more. So I wanted to look at the picture right now and possibly what we could see in the next couple of weeks. So I want to know your thoughts in the comments down below. What do you think will be the final 8 matchups for the Stanley Cup playoffs to open things up in the first round? So comment down there. If you're new here, welcome to Twisted Wrister Hockey. I'm Nick. Join our growing hockey community if you plan on following the playoffs and for all things hockey history, analysis, and culture here. So let's look at the current picture now. I do go off of points percentage, but that doesn't really seem to be much of a factor now because teams have played more or less the same number of games. So let's start in the Eastern Conference, okay? The Atlantic Division, first place is the Florida Panthers. They're a lock, basically, to finish with the best regular season record for the Eastern Conference. So consider them the number 1 overall seed for the East. They would have home ice advantage in all 3 rounds before getting to the final. So their likely first round opponent is still the Washington Capitals. It's been like that for quite some time right now. But the thing is that the Capitals, they're 4 points in back of the Pittsburgh Penguins for 3rd in the Metropolitan Division. And the Penguins have played 2 more games. They're just 3-6-1 in their last 10 games. So Washington actually has an opportunity to move up to 3rd, but they have more or less the same difficulty of schedule the rest of the way as Pittsburgh. But right now, let's think of it that way. Florida versus Washington. Also in that division, you have the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're 8-1-1 in their past 10 games. They've been on an absolute tear. Of course, Austin Matthews being a huge piece of that. They would be the number 2 seed right now in the Atlantic Division. They have a 4-point cushion on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the way things stand right now, I do like the way that Toronto is playing. So I expect them to be able to hold that down. Tampa is just 5-3-2 in their past 10 games. They were even colder, I think, before then too. But there's still a pretty good likelihood that they end up in 3rd, if not maybe even moving up to 2nd. I just don't see Tampa falling to a wild card spot. That said, they only have a 1-point lead over the Boston Bruins, same number of games played for all 3 teams. So Boston, as the first wild card, they would actually slip into the Metropolitan Division side of the bracket. And speaking of the Metropolitan Division, right now the Carolina Hurricanes are just clinging to a 2-point lead over the New York Rangers. They play today as I upload this video, and they've got one more matchup later in the season too. So it's going to be interesting to see if Carolina can hold on. I would think that they would. Their schedule the rest of the way is pretty favorable from what I've seen. So I expect them to cling to first place there, and the Rangers are likely going to be a lock for 2nd at this point. They were jockeying with Pittsburgh for a while there, but right now, as I just mentioned, Pittsburgh could finish as low as the 2nd wild card. So to reiterate, the Eastern Conference would look like this: Florida versus Washington, Toronto versus Tampa, Carolina versus Boston, and the Rangers against Pittsburgh. Now over to the Western Conference, this situation is getting really crazy. So in the Central Division, the Avalanche, they're likely going to win the President's Trophy, so the best overall record in the regular season, so they would have home ice throughout the playoffs. Now they will play the 2nd wild card, and this is a really complicated situation right now because essentially there are 4 teams that are jockeying for 3 playoff spots. In that same Central Division, you have the Nashville Predators currently in 4th place and in the wild card 1 spot. The Dallas Stars are just behind them, 1 point behind them to be exact. They would be the 2nd wild card, and they would face the Colorado Avalanche in the first round. However, there are 2 other teams that we have to introduce into the equation here: the Los Angeles Kings and the Vegas Golden Knights. So the Kings sit 3rd place in the Pacific Division. They would match up with the 2 seed there. However, they are only 2 points up on the Golden Knights, and the Knights have played 1 fewer game. The Kings are just 4-4-2 in their past 10 games. The Knights, in the meantime, have been sizzling. I think they've won 6 of 7 or 7 of 8. As I make this video, they look keen on securing a playoff spot. Now, when comparing all these teams together, yes, the Kings have the same number of points as the Dallas Stars. That's something that you do have to track. However, the Kings have played 2 more games than Dallas. Vegas is 2 points off that pace because they would be outside the playoff picture currently, but as mentioned earlier, they've played 1 fewer game than LA, but they've played 1 more game than Dallas. So right now, looking at the Western Conference, it would be Colorado against Dallas. It would be Minnesota and St. Louis. That's pretty much a lock. In the Pacific side of the bracket, Calgary, they're pretty much a lock to win that division. They would face the first wild card. That would be Nashville. And the Edmonton Oilers would face the third place team, and that would be LA. But as I mentioned, that could actually be the Golden Knights. I didn't entirely forget to mention that the Vancouver Canucks are just 4 points behind the Golden Knights, so they still mathematically have a chance, as do the Winnipeg Jets. But again, I just don't see those teams quite getting in right now. Vegas is playing hot, so I think that those teams are likely out of the playoff picture. And do keep in mind that if two teams have the same number of points at the end of the regular season, the first tiebreaker, regulation wins, and the tiebreaker after that would be rows, or regulation wins plus overtime wins. So a couple of teams who would be behind the 8 ball as it pertains to regulation wins or rows would be the Dallas Stars and the LA Kings. Dallas only has 27 rows, LA has 29, whereas Vegas has 32, and I think Nashville has 34. I didn't write that down. And one other factor I want to mention here, the Carolina Hurricanes do have more regulation wins and more rows than the New York Rangers, who are just behind them. Now here's one visualization that I made. So here what I've done is I have the larger logos, which are the shoe-in teams or the shoe-in seedings, and then I also have some other teams they could possibly face. So these are some possible situations. Florida could still technically face off against the Penguins or maybe even the Bruins, although that's pretty unlikely at this point. Toronto, I see them facing Tampa, even if Tampa ends up with home ice advantage. Boston is also a possible matchup for Toronto. I'm sure a lot of fans out there would like to see that now, wouldn't they? In the Metropolitan side of the bracket, the Hurricanes, I still think they win the division, but the New York Rangers still have a shot, most definitely, and they would face the first wild card, which again, I think will be the Bruins, but it really could still end up being the Tampa Bay Lightning. The 2 seed is at the bottom left of this visual. They would face most likely the Pittsburgh Penguins in 3rd place in the Metropolitan Division, or maybe the Washington Capitals if they can win out with those games in hand. In the Western Conference, on the Pacific side of things, the Avalanche would face either of the 4 teams that I have here, Nashville or Dallas. It's the wild card 2 spot, or maybe even the Golden Knights, or maybe even the LA Kings. The Wild and the Blues, I said they're pretty much a lock. Calgary would face the first wild card, and the Predators and the Stars have a little bit of an edge over the Golden Knights and the Kings, so that's why their logos are a little bit larger. So it's likely that we see a team from the Central Division come over to play in the Pacific bracket, and the Edmonton Oilers, they will face either the Golden Knights or the Kings at this point. And 2 more visuals that I want to introduce here. This kind of assumes that things go really topsy-turvy. So this could happen in the next couple of weeks, or at least we might see 1 or 2 of these flippings, if you will. So Florida versus Pittsburgh, Boston and Toronto, it's not out of the picture entirely. The Rangers and the Lightning, that is a possible first-round matchup if the Rangers can actually win that division, and Tampa would fall to the first wild card. And lastly, we would see the Hurricanes as the 2 seed possibly battle the Capitals as the 3 seed. And in the Western Conference, the Predators could actually move down to the second wild card. They would face the Avalanche. You got, of course, Blues and Wild. The Stars could still finish with a better points total than the Predators and move into the first wild card. They would play the Calgary Flames. And then, yeah, the Kings would actually be the team out here with the run that Vegas is on. Imagine the Golden Knights actually finishing 3rd in that division and battling the Edmonton Oilers. And then lastly, this is a more kind of prediction, if you will. I might be stretching things a little bit too far, but this is maybe a realistic shifting of teams to end the regular season. So Florida and Pittsburgh. So I'm assuming here that Washington actually leapfrogs Pittsburgh, although I think Pittsburgh has the regulation wins advantage here. I do think that this is too much of a reach, but I wanted to kind of pitch that out here. Toronto and Tampa, Carolina against Boston. Again, Carolina, they've lost 2 of the last 3 times in the postseason to Boston. The other time was against the Lightning. And so Carolina, I don't know, they could be bounced in the first round. And then lastly, the Rangers would go up against the Capitals. And then on the Western Conference side of things, the Avalanche could battle a second wild card in the LA Kings. It's not out of the picture at all. Blues and Wild. Calgary against Nashville. Nashville has pretty much been that first wild card throughout a lot of this season. So I still think that I can trust them more than the Stars. And the Predators do have a lot more regulation wins as well. And the way that the Knights are playing, I could very well see them not just getting into the playoffs, but finishing third and facing the Edmonton Oilers. But of course, I want to know your thoughts down in the comments below. What are your 8 first-round playoff matchups to start the 2022 Stanley Cup playoffs? You guys sound off down there. Hopefully you found this video interesting, and if you did, leave a big thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notifications bell. We got all sorts of content planned throughout the rest of this season and into the postseason. We'll do some live streams during the playoffs as well, so we can hang out and react to all the crazy moments that are about to take place here in just a couple weeks. I'm so excited. I hope you guys are as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Once again, I'm Nick, and I'll catch you Twisters later. Ciao.